Okay. Yeah, welcome everybody. My name is Hauke. I'm from the Leibniz Center for Tropical Marine Research in not so tropical Bremen. But we are a research institute that is only working on in the tropical context for more than 25 years now. Yeah, my presentation will be part of this WIOGEN workshop series where I'm working together with Shannon from the IOI in South Africa. And today it's on this data to decision interface and also a bit of science policy, unsolicited advice on, yeah, maybe how to improve that connection a bit. Let me check. Well, you are all scientists, so you're aware that we are living in a time of rapid change and mostly not for the better. Yeah, we have a climate crisis currently ongoing. So next week we're going to have 45 degrees estimated for Germany and France. Ecosystems are collapsing. Yeah, we have an unprecedented species loss as well. And I think it also is no surprise that we humans, or more precisely maybe development and consumption in the global north, are largely responsible for that change. So there is need for a fast status assessment to address, mitigate, or manage maybe those human-induced changes. Basically, we are also dealing with two worlds. So we have relatively not simple, but simple to address big world problems. So how to save coral reefs. We know what to do. So we have enough information to address this topic in general. It becomes much more pesky when we want to address specific coral reefs. So if a management problem. So if we want to address how can we save this specific coral reef. So those are two different scales we are working on. For many global issues, climate change, coral reef decline, we know what's causing those problems. But how to manage for that in smaller scales often stays a problem. So how can we make well-reasoned decisions in environmental management? Because those decisions are complex. Many system parameters are highly variable or uncertain. We often have multiple objectives to deal with, so quite complicated situations. On the other hand, we strive to be as inclusive as possible to address the needs of all stakeholders. Nowadays, we also try not to only add value to the ecosystems, but also especially to local coastal communities and society. And our decisions should be rational, so based on data and also easily understandable. So why are we doing things the way that we're doing for our stakeholders? And we should frequently go back to our decisions and see if they still hold true. So let's play a little role game. Imagine you are queen or king for a year of this specific strip of coastline, and you're tasked with managing it. I mean, it's idyllic, maybe a bit oversimplified and idealistic as well, but it gives us a nice glimpse of the multitude of ocean uses in those tropical coastal ecosystems. Some of those you can see here in the picture go hand in hand quite well. Some uses are competing, and a few might even be completely exclusive to others. Those activities fulfill different needs. Making money, for example, through tourism, subsistence fishing to feed your village or your family. And they will certainly have a different impact on the environment, sometimes even within one industry. So fishing can be quite sustainable, but it can also be highly destructive. So it's actually quite a messy start if you have no idea about the system and the status of the system. So you appoint a science minister. And she will start immediately monitoring the system. So environmental parameters, salinity, temperature, dissolved oxygen. She will look at the seagrasses, algae, coral reefs, fishes, the mangrove ecosystems, the coastal ecosystems as well, floodplains. And because she's very smart, she will also talk a lot to social scientists. So fishing activities, tourism, aquaculture, and also tapping indigenous knowledge, talk to local village elders, and try to get all the information about the strip of land that you can get. 1 second. So now they have a good overview of how the status is. They collected a lot of data, but still in the end, they will have no clue of what to do. Because they addressed only one part of uncertainty because they were lacking all the information so far. So they get back and talk to each other again, and now they want to try to see how the system might look in the future. So they start from that point now where they collected all the data. They feed models, and they want to see for different scenarios what will happen in the end. So now they are addressing uncertainty caused by the variation in the measurements they did. And the more you feed the models with different variables, the messier it will get in the end, and the more complicated it will be for them to basically make a decision. So the minister returns, and she seems a bit more confused. She has all the data now she needs, and she ran all the models, but they're still not certain what to do. And I mean, that's an issue that ecologists spend a lot of time thinking about and also measuring how much additional data is actually needed to reduce this uncertainty, also on local levels. Data on species distribution and trends, environmental threats, larger impacts of climate change, for example. More information on that will always reduce uncertainty. But from a standing point of this queen of this local strip of land now, so a decision-making point of view, this information is only valuable if it results in better decisions being made. And I mean, resources, especially money, is always limited. So there are trade-offs between getting more information and starting to act in the end. And yeah, it might not necessarily provide the right information to improve decisions, or it might not be even relevant at all. Because I mean, it sounds counterintuitive, but for two reasons, it might be difficult to always try to reduce uncertainty. Because, for example, it might be much more cost effective to just recover, for example, the sea turtle population through reducing mortality. So addressing plastic pollution, for example, in an area, than to trying to restore whole habitats for them. And reducing uncertainty about which of those two measures will be better is futile in the end, because it will have little effect on the decision in the end. So we will still make the same decision because it's so much cheaper and so much more feasible than to start thinking about it. And the other main reason is that expected benefits for two alternative scenarios might be so similar that you can reduce the uncertainty all you want, but in the end, you will still make the same decision because the outcome in the end will be the same. And so that's always a dilemma. You take action now, or you try to get more data. There is tools to address that, because we can work on prioritizing which data to collect to improve our decision. Because somewhere between those two extremes, new data and information will be most valuable to the decision we want to make. One of these tools is value of information analysis, for example. So you feed all your models into a preference system, so the decision you want to work for. And for the future, it can tell you and reduce your decision uncertainty. And we can create then lists of ranked variables that we will prioritize in the next monitoring. So we will save money on monitoring and can spend more money on actions. So based on our management preferences, we can identify where we want to put our efforts and achieve better management decisions in the end. But this is all fantasy land, and back to reality now. Of course, the real world of decision making is completely different from that, because often decision makers, they are people, they have their own agenda, they have commitments to their parties, to the institutions they work for, and they, of course, as persons, have their own worldview. So it's not as straightforward as you think. And they, of course, also lobbied a lot from all sorts of angles. And for researchers working on a single discipline or a single topic, it might be frustrating at points, because just having good results or very convincing evidence doesn't mean that automatically your proposed decision is being taken up. It's not the only factor deciding on a policy in the end. So the Overseas Development Institute, they worked on nice ways, because now I think most of us are early career researchers that apparently are interested in from data to decision making, or influencing also the decision making sphere. And they came up with a really nice, like 10-point plan of how to improve the chances of your recommendations being taken up. And I found some of them quite useful in my work, because I'm also a marine biologist by training that transferred into this governance sphere, and it really helped me a lot to address some of the issues. So I'm just gonna talk a bit about those as well before we go into a discussion now on the broader plenum later. So I think it's really important as a scientist that you have to know what you want to influence and what decision you are trying to influence, also from a governance perspective. So try to get into their shoes and their mindsets. You have to be very specific in what you want to achieve. So what is exactly the issue that you want to influence, and how does that influence may look like if you want it to be taken up? Also, a good idea might be to think about what your product in terms of decision-making support will look like in the end. So you want to have a very early green paper, for example, or maybe only you want to nudge policymakers in the right direction, initiate a change of mindset, for example, about a specific topic. And together with that, it's very important that you know who you want to influence, because it's not as straightforward as in our fantasy coastal strip. So conduct a very thorough stakeholder mapping in the beginning, and you have to be mindful of local politics and political sensitivities if you're working in a specific area, and try to understand the decision making, the power structures that are at hand, especially for your target audience and the processes. So what's their political mandate? What's their will? So some decisions might even be made before they reach the forums that you think they are made within the parties, for example, and within other decision-making bodies that are not as easily accessible. So indirect influence might be something to work on. So use your network. Maybe there is ways of getting connections to some of the more upper echelons of decision-making or in the political parties, and try to form alliances to work on these topics together. It's also important, I think, to start your engagement quite early, because it's not a straightforward process. So the problem might be very obvious to you, but not in the political sphere, or there might not be solutions available. So be ready with your scientific work and your research for opportunities that you didn't take into account before. So this is like Kingdon's multiple streams framework, where that says that over time you should be ready for like the stars to align in the end, and for you to make an appearance and present your suggestions, for example. And it's also, if you look in earlier like handbooks on policy making or decision making, it's often presented as a very linear process. So you have an agenda, problem identification, you set your agenda, you jointly develop the policy together, you implement it, and then after a while you monitor and see if it was successful or not. So basically like a cooking recipe. So if you do everything right, then through causal links, everything will work out in the end. But you will discover that it's not as linear and quite a messy process. If you look like parliamentary debates, for example, in England or in Germany, it's quite insightful to see how those processes can look like in the media. But those engagements also follow certain protocols, which you need to understand in those ways. And apart from research, I think one thing that sets it really much apart, decision making, you can have all the data in the world that supports your idea, but it's a very political process. So those results alone they're not everything that matters. There's institutional values, party values, personal values. There's always limited resources that might be allocated to different sectors, depending on what's going on. And those lead to decision-making trade-offs. There's things you don't account for, like a global pandemic or wars going on. So also fundings and opportunities might change quickly. So it's important to be patient in your engagement and wait for that right moment, and keep engaging with the network that you formed. And I don't know if you had, some of you, I think, and I'm pretty sure, had lots of contact with decision makers. They're quite a busy lot. So you need to frame a problem, but you immediately also need to focus on constructive approaches to tackle the problem that you identified. So based on your finding, have concrete recommendations ready on what should happen, who needs to be involved in your approach. And it will be negotiations in the end. So be ambitious in what you want to achieve, because it's not everything that you're going to get. But try to be realistic as well. So not raise the bar too high and not raise expectations too much with what you can actually achieve. And last but not least, also a bit different maybe from some parts of research, that's a marathon and not a sprint. So it starts at the very first engagements with decision makers. Allow for time to trust. I mean, based on their background, if you have a very green agenda and they are more from a conservative party, they might be skeptical in the beginning. Set smaller achievable milestones maybe along the way, so you have some successes to present already. Keep the engagement, so don't see it as a one-time experience where you present your ideas and then you expect it to, at one point at least, be automatically taken up. Get feedback on your topic from decision makers. Keep an eye on the process, so the decision-making process itself. Be aware of when there might be good times. So the Nairobi Convention, Conference of Parties, for example, is always a good set deadline where you can have larger regional impacts in the area, for example, for the Western Indian Ocean. and learn along the way. So if some things work out better than others, then try to adjust your plan, revisit your network again, and see what's going on. And a good colleague of ours, Alex Blankenstein, he had a really nice, he made a similar presentation about this. And he said, it's probably not his quote, fail to plan and you plan to fail. So have your engagement set out from the very beginning. So have small elevator pitches ready. So whenever you encounter somebody that might have decision-making power, you can pitch your idea and start an engagement with them, and yeah, know what products you want to do, and yeah, at any stage try to be as ready as possible to use your data to influence the decision-making process, because it's not automatic, and I think it's very frustrating sometimes for researchers, because yeah, they spend a lot of time working on this, and you see it in many abstracts, like there's recommendations for decision makers, but I think it's not an automatic process, and most of the decision makers will not have time to read through papers. So we need to find different approaches to work on that. Yeah, I think with that, my initial talk is over. Yeah, thanks a lot.